after the other. I'm starting with you, Gülsel, ich fange mit dir an. Wie viel Wert haben denn Proteste eigentlich innerhalb unserer Gesellschaft? Was für einen Stellenwert haben die?
Die Proteste sind dafür da, dass Menschen etwas zeigen, dass sie unzufrieden sind, dass sie mit einer Situation eine Veränderung, Bewegung schaffen möchten. Und all diese Proteste, die wir in den letzten Zeiten haben, die bewegen die Gesamtjugendliche. Und ich kriege eine Gänsehaut, weil ich finde das großartig, dass ganz kleine Kinder mit 9 Jahren auf die Straße gehen und Friday for Future als Bewegung in die Wege tun. Und diese Bewegungen natürlich sollen was bewirken, aber politisch und auch wirtschaftlich, wir müssen auf diese Bewegungen auch reagieren, weil diese Bewegungen sind nicht nur für die Jugendlichen, dass sie etwas für sich selbst allein wollen, das ist kein Egoismus, sondern sie wollen über die Welt hinaus, über dem Globalen hinaus, für die Erde etwas bewirken.
Jared, I have that question for you too. Protests are something that have been taking place in the past and they're still taking place. How do you see the value of protests within our society globally?
Ja,
our societies?
Ein bisschen Deutsch vor einem Moment. Ja. Ich verstehe mehr als sprechen.
Okay. You can answer in English.
I got a little bit of that.
Okay, cool.
Good.
All right.
I think to act, the first thing we should do is just start doing something. I think that a lot of us wait for these kind of purity tests. If I do this, if I, instead of just moving to a plant-based diet, they feel like they have to go fully vegan. Or instead of limiting their travel, they feel like they have to stop traveling. Instead of, feeling like they have to, leave school every Friday, maybe they can do it every other Friday. I mean, I think people should just get involved and not make it feel so binary, like I have to do all or nothing. And, what you'll realize is the more you do, the more contagious that becomes and the more you'll keep doing. You'll start recognizing like, yeah, vegan makes sense, limiting travel makes sense, getting politically active makes sense, marching makes sense. You start to realize that all of these things become healthy habits. It's like exercise. It's like our reading habits, and so I would just encourage everyone just to start and not worry about purity at the beginning, because we're complicated, flawed human beings, and we're never going to be perfect. And I think the idea is just to get out there and to try to push for a better world. The reason why I make films, I think, is I'm trying to find a way for myself to get involved. I've made a number of different climate change films. The most recent one, The Great Green Wall, looks at a story in Africa, one of resilience. My prior films looked at everything from the climate movement and the divestment movement, the divestment of fossil fuels, to climate change as a national security issue, as well as films on inequality. And we know that climate and inequities and that all these problems that we're facing, you mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests, whether it's racial injustice, whether it's climate injustice, whether it's injustice of any shape or size or stripe, that we should be battling for all those together. And once you start doing one, you'll realize it becomes an infectious process. And not only will you motivate yourself, but you'll also motivate others. And I think that we need that we need to take that vicious cycle that we've created with our habits and turn it into a virtuous cycle.
Show alternatives. I think that's also what the movies are made for, that you can not only address the people that have done the things wrong, but you can also tell them what they can do better. Ludka, how would you add what protests do within our society? What can you add?
Well, we can see that probably the whole evolution of our society is based on protest. So if we want to evolve our culture, our spirituality, our politics, protest is always the start. And then we have to add up pressure to the protest because we will see very quickly that just being in the street raises the awareness but will not change real politics. So then the idea is, how you can add up pressure. It was strikes in the older times. Now they just moved their industries to another country. But you can make, for example, boycotts, and they really, the big companies really need you to buy their stuff. And so you can make a vote every day on your filling station or in your supermarket with your dollar or with your euro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the power of the small man, so-called, because of course we can all make little changes at least. So to take action is one thing, but how do we put our society on new foundations to protect the climate and with that our future? Protesting, yes, it's one possibility. Totally, I agree, to open people's eyes. One of the largest protests of Greenpeace vs. Shell was documented in Brent Spa, The Power of the Consumer, by my guests, Gülsel Özkan and Ludger Pfantz. Let's take a look at the trailer.
Die Nordsee, Ölfördergebiet. Am 30. April 1995 dringen Aktivisten von Greenpeace in dieses Gebiet vor. Es soll zu einem der größten politischen und medialen Abenteuer unserer Zeit werden. Das Ziel der Aktivisten, die Brent Spa. Der Konzern Shell will diese Plattform versenken.
Und dann kam von oben ein Haken runter, ein Karabinerhaken, da wurde man dann eingeklickt und dann mit der Winde hochgezogen. Das war so unwirklich.
Wir haben diese blöde Plattform besetzt.
Und Shell reagierte nicht.
Lässt Shell uns jetzt da in Anführungszeichen verhungern? Werden wir geräumt? Machen die überhaupt irgendwas?
Der grundlegende Fehler wurde gemacht, dass man Greenpeace nicht seriös genommen hat. Das hätte man vom ersten Tag an machen sollen.
Stay dive, Brent Spa.
Stay dive, hier spricht die Brent Spa. Es ist euch nicht erlaubt, näher als 500 Meter heranzukommen. Das hier ist, um das Meer zu schützen, von dem wir leben. Ihr vergewaltigt den Planeten. Ich hoffe, ihr schämt euch dafür.
Am Morgen des 22. Mai 1995 beginnt Shell mit der Operation.
Dann ließen sie den Käfig einfach herunterknallen.
Sie kamen schnell und sind an Bord. Wir versuchen uns in verschiedenen Positionen zu verschanzen und so lange wie möglich durchzuhalten.
Sie fühlten sich unbesiegbar und unverletzbar. Sie glaubten, niemand könne ihnen etwas anhaben. Es war eine gute Kampagne. Und wir versuchten klarzumachen, dass, wenn man so etwas baut, man es nicht einfach wegwerfen kann, sondern dass man es danach anders verwenden oder recyceln muss. Man kann so etwas nicht einfach ins Meer oder sonst wohin werfen. Das wollten wir klar machen. Aber was wir wirklich klar machen wollten, war die Macht der Konsumenten, auf etwas zu reagieren, was sie nicht mochten. Und zwar vehement und unmittelbar.
Ich muss einen Teebeutel in 3 verschiedene Mülltonnen entsorgen. Eine für die Schnur, eine fürs Papier und eine für die Teeblätter. Und die versenken dieses Monstrum einfach im Meer.
Das Meer darf nicht zur Müllkippe eines Ölkonzerns missbraucht werden.
Dass die Bundesregierung der Meinung ist, dass diese Bohrinseln nicht versenkt werden sollten.
Es ist gut, dass der Skandal der Giftmüllversenkung, denn darum handelt es sich, endlich thematisiert wird im Atlantik und in der Nordsee.
Nach der Räumung wollten die Aktivisten unbedingt zurück auf die Brent Spa.
Und die einzige Möglichkeit war mit dem Helikopter. Und das war schwierig und gefährlich. Denn wenn man nahe kommt, bekommt man die Wasserwerfer gegen sich und die sind so gewaltig.
Vor den Augen der Weltpresse verdichtet sich die Auseinandersetzung zu einer postmodernen Neuauflage des Mythos David gegen Goliath.
Die versuchten mich mit den Wasserkanonen von Deck zu schießen.
Da dachten wir, das geht total schief. So funkten wir John Castle an und sagten, was hier abgeht, ist jenseits jedes gesunden Menschenverstandes.
Offensichtlich entglitten ihnen die Dinge aus den Händen. Und dann sagte er nur, die Brent Spa dreht. Wir drehen um.
Und da wurde es offensichtlich, dass sie dabei waren, umzudrehen. Und er sagte, wir haben gewonnen.
Alle unsere Forderungen wurden erfüllt. Sie haben das Ding nicht versenkt.
Eines war klar, die Welt hatte sich mit der Brent Spar verändert, denn eine neue Macht war auf der Weltbühne aufgetaucht. Die Macht der Verbraucher.
Die Bedeutung hat wirklich eine große Wirkung gehabt, angefangen mit einem ganz normalen Greenpeace-Aktion, die dann später auf einen großen Allianz sich gebildet hat. Wir haben zum ersten Mal in der Weltgeschichte eine Allianz zwischen links und rechts, eine Allianz zwischen Religion und NGOs. Wir haben eine Allianz zwischen Politik und einzelne individuelle gesellschaftliche Personen gehabt. Und diese Dimension hat gezeigt, dass man durch eine Allianz, durch ein klares Ziel sehen kann, wir können doch was ändern. Und die Stärke dieser Beispiel ist auch so, dass wir aus dem Grund als Festivalleiter aus unseren Filmen 2 ausgewählt haben. Einer davon ist die Brent Spar, weil wir denken, dass man sich wieder erinnern muss. Man muss diese Kollektivität, diese Allianz wieder in den Vordergrund bringen, um derzeitigen Situation ein Spiegelbild zu zeigen, dass man eventuell durch so eine Allianz wieder auch das Klimawandel und Klimakatastrophe auch überwinden kann.
Hoffentlich. Because climate change is in the center of, is the focus of the Beyond Film Festival this year. There's so much going on through the COVID-19 situation, and we keep forgetting that climate change is still taking place. And Gülsel Özkan and Lutka Funds made sure that that is back in our focus. Lutka, the role of the people in this. I mean, you interviewed several personalities. What was the role of them?
Well, the first thing is it is regarded as one of the biggest success of Greenpeace in recent years. But it started not with much support of Greenpeace. There were about a couple of freaks on inflatables who occupied this platform. And then it became, and the first time Shell didn't react, and they were hanging on this platform for 2 weeks. And then Shell went off and took them off the platform. And this was when then Greenpeace said this could become great. And then Greenpeace really helped them. But then they started a boycott in Germany. And it spread to the Netherlands, and then it spread to Scandinavia, and then in the last weeks they spread to UK, and people boycotted everything of the Shell company. And they forced them, in this time it was the third biggest company in the world, and they forced them on their knees. They, in 3 months, they won completely. Yeah? And John Major, as Minister President of UK, had to step back. He recovered from that. Yeah? But you can see that if you start in the right moment, and we have to smell the right moment.
So it's a matter of timing also?
It's a matter of timing.
Das war ja eine sehr radikale Aktion. Und ist denn der Nachhall heute noch spürbar? Was hast du da für ein Gefühl? Oder muss man neu und noch radikaler vielleicht an den Start gehen?
Ich meine, es ist eine historische Einzelexemplar in unserem Jahrhundert, dass so eine Allianz etwas bewirkt hat. Und wir haben verschiedene Bewegungen gerade. Wir haben Friday for Future Bewegung, wir haben Scientists for Future Bewegung, wir haben noch andere viele Bewegungen. Wir haben individuelle, einzelne Personen, wir haben ja auch bei unserem ersten Gespräch mit den Regisseurinnen auch gehört, die auch einzeln individuell sagen, ich fliege nicht mehr, ich mache das nicht mehr und. Das heißt, jeder, der für das Klima etwas tut, ist bereits dabei, was zu tun. Aber wir haben noch keine Idee, wie man diese Komplexität zu einem gemeinsamen Nenner bringen kann, wie man einfach diese Situation so schnell wie möglich zu einem Handel bringen kann. Und ich denke, dass in dieser Bewegung gewisse Dinge sich zusammentun müssen. Uns muss es klar werden, dass das Einzelkampf natürlich was vorwärts bringt, aber eine Allianz ist notwendig. Und wie diese Allianz sein wird in der Frage der Klimawandel, das muss sich jetzt natürlich auch jetzt schnell zeigen. Und wir müssen auch aus dem Corona-Maßnahmen auch schnell auch Maßnahmen nehmen und diese Maßnahmen zu unserem politischen Lösung mit einbinden und sagen, das ist der Masterplan. So fahren wir den Zug jetzt.
Covid-19 hat ja auch gezeigt, dass es möglich ist. Es ist möglich, schnell zu reagieren, auch politisch schnell zu reagieren. Friday for Future wurde jetzt schon ein paar Mal angesprochen, die nächste Generation, die uns alle ja auch aufrütteln will, dass sich was ändert. Im Moment, so sagen die kritischen Stimmen, ist da viel Lärm um nichts. Ne? Also es kommen unheimlich viele Kinder und Jugendliche zusammen, es kommen junge Menschen zusammen, die sind top organisiert, die haben Top-Argumente, die werden von den Größen der UN und whatnot, you name it, werden sie gehört, aber ändert sich politisch was? Eigentlich noch nicht so wirklich.
Nein.
Das ist leider, es ist wirklich ein Problem. Ja. Ludger, wenn man jetzt euren Film betrachtet, if we take a look at your film, do you think that this film is also maybe going to push forward the Friday for Future movement and change something within the younger generation, how they should act maybe to make a change?
Well, it's an example. If you have an opposition, if you have, I would not say enemy, but something like that. Yeah, you have a clear opponent.
Yes.
Then you have to look on their weak spots. And the weak spot of our system is money. So if we go on their burst, they will really react. They can react violently, or they have to kind of adjust. Yeah, but this is when you look at the industry or our politician, their completely weak spot is their bursts.
That's why they say the youth, they can, of course, try to make us all aware, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be the ones buying the gas. They're not going to be the ones driving the cars. It's not them, but it's us. It's our generation. So how can you inspire the young ones to turn it into a protest that is taken seriously?
Well, the thing is, it's great that they go for strike for school, but this doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt anyone, exactly.
Yeah? But they can. The next thing is they can kick asses with their parents and with their grandparents, and then they can start. And we don't think that they don't spend any money. They spend quite a lot. Young people spend a lot of money, or let's say their parents spend a lot of money, and the young people spend a lot of money. If they make a decision not to spend money for a system which is not appropriate for their future, they will get reaction.
Mm-hmm. Jared, have a sip. Let's come back to you, Jared. How do you see that? I mean, Fridays for Future, I think it's a great movement. I don't want to say anything against it. I think it really shows that there is so much power that can come from one single person and make a movement around the world. And that's what we need now that we're in the middle of the climate change. We have a problem with the climate. No one can deny that any longer, especially now during COVID-19, where we became much more aware of time, values, nature, and all that. How do you see the changes that are going to take place? Do you think that changes will take place, or do you think that people are just going to go back to what they know?
I mean, I'm hopeful when I see people act. So you mentioned the Fridays for Future. You know, whether that's the youth out there in the streets or all of us joining the youth, letting the youth lead, but following that lead. I mean, I think that's when you become hopeful. There's an earned hope there. It's a mature hope. It's you know, sometimes I don't really think about in terms of hope and despair with the crisis. I often think, how can I be useful? You know, I can often be useful as a body in the street. I can be useful taking my creative energies, and as opposed to working for brands, I could make films, you know, about the environment. How can we be useful? I believe in the Fridays for Future movement. Since you know, Greta Thunberg is is obviously the face of that, but there's so many leaders around the world in so many different countries. But you know, I think as Greta has said too about the COVID-19 crisis, here we have now, not everywhere. You can see what's happening in this country. A lot of people aren't treating it, the COVID-19 crisis, like a crisis, and there's a failure of leadership. And we knew that this was coming, but we were woefully prepared. There's a lot of similarities with climate. You know, same thing. We know it's coming, but we are woefully unprepared. We know it's happening, and we're woefully unprepared, and we lack serious action. On a political front, globally, we've done basically nothing as a society. So it's tough. I mean, every year we see emissions just increasing and increasing. I think all these things matter. I think behavioral change matters. I think what we do matters. Whether it's voting with your pocketbook or marching in the streets or civil disobedience, because at the end of the day, I think there has to be a value shift. Ultimately, we need to change the political process. We need to pressure politicians. We need to demand that they do something. That is how democracies are supposed to work. But I think that all these things that we do will help create a value shift. And I think that's important in this crisis. But, in terms of when you look at just emissions, we have about 7.5 years before we teeter over that 1.5 degree threshold. We basically have a 0% chance of maintaining that. So that's difficult. But, that doesn't mean we stop doing anything. It actually means we ramp it up. Just because the goal now seems less attainable, it doesn't mean that we change the goal. We know that any amount of warming is bad. 1 degree of warming, 1.2, 1.5, we know any degree is bad. And there's no magical number where that just becomes, we tip over. So we know that anything that we can mitigate is good. But it's just like the Great Green Wall in our film. The idea is that it's a wildly ambitious idea, but it does need to happen. There needs to be rapid, wide-scale, massive regreening measures in the Sahel, just like there needs to be this rapid, massive deduction of fossil fuel emissions globally. And just because both of those seem like they are these Herculean tasks, it doesn't mean that we then lower the bar. We need to somehow raise the level of engagement, even if they are out of reach. Because if we keep saying, oh, well, we can't do that, that's not politically possible. Oh, we can't do that, that's not going to happen. Then we're looking at a world that's 6 to 8 degrees Celsius warming. That can't happen. So I think that we have to somehow divorce ourselves from what we've been told is politically possible, because the only way that we're going to actually have a chance at this, a fighting chance, is if we, get out in the streets and make some noise.
And that's what you're also doing with your film, The Green Wall. It's, as you said, it's highly ambitious, but actually this, I think, is possible. And it has started before also in different parts of this world, that young people were planting trees, literally, to do something for the climate. We can all do that, And then that's why I think your film is very inspiring, which is actually the next topic, the next subtopic of our activism panel. Inspiring, how can we inspire people to act? Can we inspire them by making films like The Great Green Wall? The Green Wall, I think so too. And Jared Scott brought this movie with him. You can, of course, stream it if you buy a ticket under www.beyond-filmfestival.com. You will support the young filmmakers, and you will have the possibility to stream more than 50 films in their full length, including The Great Green Wall, which will be in the cinemas in Germany in October. So, Jared P. Scott's film, The Great Green Wall. Let's take a look at the trailer.
My home is embattled by desertification and drought. It's on the front line of climate change. If people can't work their land, millions across the region will be forced to migrate.
Joining us from the studios, we have Malian musician and activist Ina Moja. She's traveling across Africa, recorded an album inspired by the Great Green Wall.
I heard about this ambitious idea that aims to regreen landscapes from Senegal to Djibouti. An 8,000-kilometer Great Green Wall in the making.
Le Sahel, c'est la lisière du Sahara. Mais la lisière n'est pas encore désert. C'est une histoire de survie de toutes ces populations du Sahel.
It's way beyond planting trees. It's about revitalizing the ecosystem, the economy of communities.
I wonder if we are going to succeed because it's bold.
It's ambitious because it needs us to act on it. The future generation will hold us accountable.
Africa is home to the youngest population in the world. By 2050, there will be more than 1 billion people under the age of 25. By restoring the land, can we create an African dream? Est-ce que tu te vois vouloir rester ici, à travailler la terre?
waaye nag si condition moyen bu ñu mën a liggéeyee fii te man moom ñaanuma yàlla dugg si gaal yi dem uti.
Il y a des gens qui comptent sur moi, mais j'ai perdu beaucoup de choses.
With drought and desertification, what will these people do?
Daudin Kapsanja, Bazanyo preparing our home.
How impactful will your advocacy through music be?
I can use my voice as an artist to share what's at stake. We need to make this happen now. It has to become a movement from the whole continent, from the whole world.
Yes, join the movement. What a great film, Jared. Very, very impressive. My father's from Cameroon, and there it's part of the Chad Lake countries, and the Chad Lake also has decreased over the past decades. I mean, there is like no chance for the people under these circumstances to survive, basically, and including their cattle, including their animals. So the Great Green Wall is not only an ambitious project, but it truly shows how the future of Africa could be in a positive way, instead of then, as it was said in the trailer, going on these boats to flee their countries. They could actually, by planting simply trees, avoid that situation if politics go along. Because we also could see, Jared, in your film, the other side of the medal. You have the possibility maybe to plant some trees, but what if politics don't go along? Why did you decide to make this film?
Actually, when most of my other films it's always started with the genesis, something that I wanted to set out to do, and then I started making the film. This, I was actually approached by the executive producers, Sarah McDonald and Alexander Azen, and Ina Moja. And, I actually remember celebrating the fact, I had heard about the Great Green Wall for a long time, since 2007 when it started, and I was well aware of it. And, I guess I remember talking to a producer, a friend of mine, and, I said, hey, I think I'm going to, go tell this story, help this team craft this story. And, kind of her first, the words out of her mouth were reticence. She questioned whether or not, I should be doing this. I was the only American on it. I'm a white male director. Maybe I wasn't the right person to tell this story. And, after thinking about it and then talking with Ina, Ina basically said, hey, look, we're looking for someone who's told a lot of climate change stories and can take this. We have this music component, we have this wall, and we just need to bring it all together. So I eventually did come on and crafted the vision for the film alongside the amazing team. But it took me a second to get there. But once I got there, clearly I'm always looking for any way to find a new avenue, a new entry point for people to understand climate, or to understand all the ecological and socio-political issues that surround climate. So in the film, we traveled from country to country and, looked at different issues of what it would be like where in a world where the wall didn't come to fruition. And it's not just about planting trees. It's really about revitalizing ecosystems. It's about emboldening people on the ground and helping them to have a better livelihood. It's about all sorts of development. At one point in the film, Papa Sarr, who's one of the stewards in northern Senegal, talks about how it's a mosaic of a number of different regreening initiatives. So a wall is a way to visualize it, but really it's this mosaic of a number of different types of projects, a number of different development projects, holistic projects. Some of those are planting initiatives, and some of them are community development initiatives. But I think the idea is that, here we have a really fragile ecosystem to begin with, a really fragile part of the world. And Africa is a giant country, so it's tough. You have to realize we're talking about the Sahel. And the Sahel in Arabic means shore. And it's that area that's really that semi-arid, dry area below the Sahara Desert, but above the more humid forest areas in the south. So it's this really fragile sliver. And it crosses about 11 to 13 countries. And so that's the area that we wanted to focus on. And in this area, you have roughly 90% of people living off some form of agriculture. So the land is everything. And we know that the land there is about 75% of it's considered to be severely degraded according to the FAO. This is incredibly dire. I mean, here you have this this lifeblood that needs to be revitalized. And so everything has to be done with that. And I think the tough thing is, here as a global society, this is a classic case of climate injustice. Here you've had people who have done literally the least to contribute to this problem, the least amount of emissions. I think that someone in, the carbon footprint to someone in Mali versus someone in Europe is so infinitely small, and yet they are bearing the brunt of the wealthier countries' pollution, the wealthier countries' emissions. And that's something that really struck me. I've always been struck by this idea of climate injustice. I mean, any injustice really kind of gnaws at me and gets under my skin. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go out there was to actually give voice to this place on the ground. And what I realized the best way for me to do that was to listen and to step away. Ina is a Malian, daughter of the Sahel. She's comfortable in the savannah or in the big cities. And, the idea was just to step away and try to allow her to meet people at their level. I didn't want to come in as a journalist with my Western perspective. I wanted it to be, this is an African-led project. The voices should all be African people on the front lines. And that's what we wanted to do. And we made it all handheld. There's no interviews. It's all conversation-based, strong eye line, strong emotion. And the goal was to really bring the viewer into that world as opposed to being this kind of outside force looking in.
Now that the Black Lives Matter movement is also like at the peak, basically, you're probably going to hit some nerve also, because we all need to see, of course, what's going on that great continent, Africa. And Jared, I mean, looking at it now with your project, has the film also maybe changed an approach to the project? I mean, you said that you traveled to a couple of countries, and I'm sure that not all the countries were equally open. So did you get how was the atmosphere when your journey took place?
Well, in the context of, I guess, let me first address the Black Lives Matter idea. I mean, look, the thing about Black Lives Matter, and thank you to everyone in Germany who's been also rising up in solidarity against, racial injustice, against structural racism. We've seen a global outpouring of this. Clearly in the US, we have a unique experience as well, but there's a lot of similarities throughout the world. There's this overt racism, there's this covert racism, and then there's structural racism. And I think a lot of that is what, the Black Lives Matter movement aims to address. I think if you can go a little broader, I'd even argue that there's a cultural racism that's at play in the Sahel. I mean, again, I think looking at climate, this idea of climate injustice, again, is that the global north are polluting and causing the problem, and the global south are the ones that are dealing with it and have the least amount of resources to deal with it as well. And I think that is a form of climate apartheid. That is a form of climate injustice. That is cultural, structural racism. The climate issue is a racial justice issue when looking at that. I mean, on the ground, though, in terms of what the energy was like, I came there with that idea, thinking about injustice, thinking about the consequences, but we were also telling this hopeful story. And so one of the things that I wanted to figure out is, would the Great Green Wall be this manifestation of the African dream? Could it symbolize an African dream? And what I was blown away by is, sometimes here, going back to some of the earlier questions about hope or how to act, sometimes I feel hopeful, other times I don't. Other times I have, there's a great word in German, Weltschmerz, yeah? I feel like climate makes me pessimistic. I have this world pain, this Weltschmerz. And what you realize is, what I was really taken by is when I traveled to Senegal and Mali and Niger and Nigeria and Ethiopia, was that the people that I met on the front lines, really in some of these vulnerable areas where they were living off the land, I was really impressed and taken by the optimism. It almost seems like, I've said this a lot, but I almost feel like sometimes pessimism is this thing that people do in cosmopolitan cities like, New York and Berlin and London and Paris, and go, yeah, it's too bad what's happening.
Yeah, it's like the one world, the first world point of view, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you have what I noticed on the ground is that there wasn't an option to be pessimistic. No one was throwing up their hands. It was kind of like everyone was rolling up their sleeves and kind of saying, yeah, let's get to work. And I think, that was, and I really think that action, there's an old saying that you can't wring your hands and roll up your sleeves at the same time. And so seeing action happening, seeing people willing and eager to help build this new world wonder, like that idea of optimism, that idea of perseverance, that idea of resolve, that really struck me on my trip.
And you had a very strong protagonist by choosing Ina Moja. She gives her personal stance on the whole film, and how to fight also for the positive change. Is that a way of addressing people, maybe also, that you say popular musicians or celebrities, they can bring people more to think about changes? How do you see that, Jared?
I mean, I don't think there's one entry point into this conversation. I think there's a whole host of we could be having a conversation about climate change and the Sahel and the Great Green Wall as we are now. We could talk about climate change and health, climate change and security, climate change and the rise of zoonotic diseases with the destruction of the ecosystem. We could talk about injustices and racial injustice. I think there's a number of ways we can look at this issue. It's really infinite, and I think that means there's a number of voices that need to give voice to it. So I think depending where you are in the world and what your platform is, I think everyone who has a platform should be talking about this. Whether it's the climate crisis or the ecological crisis or the racial crisis or the plastic waste crisis, whatever it might be, that we all have to do things, even if they seem unpopular, inconvenient, and unprofitable, that we all need to be out there trying to give voice to this. So yeah, I mean, I think, in this instance, Ina, it was a blessing. I mean, Ina was not only, she didn't come as an expert, as a journalist. She came as a daughter of the Sahel, as she says, someone who wanted to get to know this region of the world better. I mean, she's from that region, but it's so different. I mean, you mentioned your father was from Cameroon or Chad?
Cameroon.
Yes. I mean, it's wildly different in every place. There's so many different languages and people. And just because Ina's from Mali doesn't mean that she has been to every place in the neighboring country. So, and also there's a big difference between, say, Bamako and Dakar and Nairobi, and the capital cities are very different than the rural areas. There's this Africa Rising, there's this amazing stuff happening in the capitals, but there's still the people that are really going to be most affected by the Great Green Wall are those 90% that I mentioned that are living off on some form of agriculture, the peasants. So there's inequalities in each country. There's differences in across each country. So I think what's really beautiful about the wall is it's kind of this. We've always heard about Pan-Africanism. I mean, I think this is another symbol of that Pan-African movement, of this idea a number of people coming together for a common goal. But yeah, Ina was an absolute blessing. I mean, she was doing all the hard work of speaking with people and listening to people, and then in the background, turning that into beautiful music. You know, we would shoot 14 hours, and then she'd have to wake up the next day and go and write and record a song. So, you know, on a project like this, it's all that collective energy. You know, Ina, the film team on the ground, led by Tim Craig, the producers, myself, all of us, you know, doing our part, because it takes a village to create a film, and all of us doing that part, and then feeding off the energy of the team and the energy of the people that we met along the way.
Speaking of which, like speaking of teams, Jared, I'm going to ask my guests here at the studio also about that. I mean, making a film like you did the documentation of what happened in the past and how the people are here now. Wie ist das, wenn ihr jetzt zum Beispiel auf das Team guckt, mit dem ihr diesen Film umsetzen konntet, euren Brand Spa? Also Jared hat nochmal ganz doll hervorgehoben, wie viel Teamarbeit eben halt auch bedeutet. Das ist ja auch, finde ich, so ein bisschen ein Indiz über das, was Bewegungen mit sich bringen können. Man hat einen Menschen mit einer Idee oder zwei in dem Fall und dann hat man das Team und dann bringt man das raus in die Welt und dann wird die Welt hoffentlich reagieren. Wie war das bei euch mit eurem Team? Wie war die Zusammenarbeit?
Also ursprünglich haben wir 2004 über dieses Thema recherchiert. Ludger und ich kamen wir auf die Idee, dass wir ein Drehbuch schreiben sollten, für einen Spielfilm natürlich. Und zuerst ist dieses Drehbuch entstanden. Angefangen haben wir dafür zu recherchieren auf reale Basis. Und mittendrin, wo wir in der Recherche waren, haben wir gesagt, Mensch, das ist ein tolles Thema, darüber sollten wir gleichzeitig parallel einen Dokumentarfilm machen. Dann haben wir auf das Datum geguckt, haben gesehen, 2005 hat das Brand Spa 10 Jahre Jubiläum. Wir arbeiten sehr viel, wenn wir Filme machen. All unsere Themen sind natürlich Ökologie, Menschenrechte, indigene Völker, Naturvölker. Da haben wir sehr, sehr viele Filme gemacht und bei diesem Geschichte haben wir dann gesagt, komm, wir machen ein Drehbuch darüber und gleichzeitig haben wir das Konzept zu einem Dokumentarfilm entwickelt. Und zu der Zeit habe ich einen Fernsehsender gesucht. Ich habe überall dieses Drehbuch geschickt, zu jedem Redaktion von ARD bis ZDF und so weiter. Es kam nur eine Ablehnung. Eine einzige Dame von Hessischer Rundfunk war so begeistert, dass sie mir gesagt hat, es tut mir leid, ich habe kein Budget. Ich würde so gerne diesen Film realisieren, der ist historisch wichtig, der ist inhaltlich wichtig. Und meine einzige Reaktion war ein bisschen Enttäuschung und das konnte ich im Telefon nicht rübergeben. Da habe ich so ein stöhnenden Geräusch gemacht, so, oh. Und plötzlich war eine Stille und in diese Stille hat sie eine neue Idee gegriffen und gesagt, Mensch, probier doch mal beim WDR die Story-Redaktion. Und ich hatte eigentlich gar keine Kraft, gar keine Energie mehr, diesen Konzept überall zu schicken und mit Redakteuren zu reden, ihnen die Wichtigkeit dieses Inhalts zu erklären. Dann saß ich frustriert ein paar Stunden da und dann habe ich gesagt, komm, es ist ja einfach ein E-Mail mit Anhang, nur Anrede geändert, schick doch mal das letzte E-Mail. Und hoffnungslos stand ich da, am nächsten Tag klingelt mein Telefon, Westdeutscher Rundfunk ruft an und sagt, großartiges Thema, wir sind dabei, wir wollen diesen Film haben. Für uns war das natürlich auch großartig, weil die Kosten, dass wir überall in der Welt waren, in mindestens, Ludger kann auch die Länder gleich noch aufzählen, waren auch enorm natürlich. Und von diesem Moment an haben wir das Crew zusammengesucht und haben aber in der Regel 3 bis 4 Personen nur am Set. Und deshalb, weil wir, sagen wir mal, nicht Norm-Drehtage haben. Das heißt, wenn wir für 18 Tage Bezahlung bekommen, wir drehen in der Regel bei so einem Film 3 Monate. Und in der 3-Monate-Phase ist natürlich bei mehr Personalkosten entstehen auch mehr Kosten. Das heißt, wir konzentrieren uns sehr stark auf unsere Kernteam, dass wir zusammen gut arbeiten können. Und in dem Fall hatten wir auch mit Holger Brack, den haben wir auch als Kameramann gehabt und Mehr weiß ich jetzt nicht. Und wir waren dann wirklich zu zweit oder zu dritt unterwegs und sind sehr, sehr gut damit auch ausgekommen. Dafür haben wir umso länger gedreht. Dafür haben wir auch geschaut, dass wir eine unterschiedliche Location haben. Eine Location für Brand-Spa-Aktivisten. Da haben wir konzipiert, dass sie immer mit Wasser verbunden sind. Die stehen immer im Film mit Hintergrund irgendwo im Gewässer. Und die Shell-Personal haben wir natürlich in Räumlichkeiten dann auch gedreht. Und also zurück zu deiner Frage. Wir arbeiten natürlich auch mit gleichsinnigen Kollegen zusammen.
Gleichgesinnten.
Gleichgesinnten, genau. Wo wir versuchen, aus technischen Bereich, von Kameraposition aus, inhaltlich aber auch, die Dinge so rüber zu bekommen, dass es auch authentisch ist. Und wir setzen auch in der dokumentarischen Film immer eine Dramaturgie. Das heißt, die Dramaturgie, die für Spielfilme funktionieren, die setzen wir auch in unsere Dokumentarfilme an, sodass die Leute bis zum Schluss gebannt sitzen.
Ludger, Gülser was talking about the different countries that you had to travel to or that you were filming at, and also it was the same with Jared. I mean, Jared was saying that he was traveling throughout a small amount of countries on the African continent. So is it maybe also that filmmaking brings continents together, which we need if we fight the climate change? I mean, it's not a matter of one country or one person or one society, but it is a global problem. Do you think that film might be a bridge between countries also?
Well, we started in the 70s to work in different resistance movements all around the world. And the filmmaking came with that because we wanted to be a part of it, and we were very bad in guns, so we chose the camera to support him because most of those movements had no media. And traveling the world, we spent a couple of years with different indigenous resistance movements, from the Lakota to the Hopi, the Navajo, with Rigoberta Menchú, who later won a Nobel Peace Prize, then with the Amazonian rainforest. Then we were in Zimbabwe. We were invited to the Black African Women's Film Festival in Zimbabwe as jury members. And then we were in China, and then we were in Kurdistan. And we were in the first Gulf War. We were smuggled from the Palestinians into Baghdad. And by being so much confronted with different parts in the world, we start to feel like being planetarian. And now we can transport it. Yeah? It's not that you are raised and you understand that you're part of a planet and part of a biosphere, but by your personal biography, you will get forced to understand that you are part of a much, much bigger thing.
True. Hopefully everyone understands it one day. Jared, coming back to you once more. Are you still with us? Yes, you are.
Yes,
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. That we are part of a bigger being of the planet. What is your expectation concerning your film, The Great Green Wall? What changes is it going to make? What do you think?
I mean, I think my hope is that the wall, that this film, it adds to that value shift that I mentioned earlier. Climate change is a wicked problem. There's not one way to solve it. It's going to take everything we got in every way, shape, or form. It's a silver buckshot, not a silver bullet, right? So we have to do so many different things, and we have to activate on so many different levels. So my hope is that, and I think part of that is having this value shift. You mentioned, COVID-19 at the start of this. It made us stop and think, well, what is the value of what's the price of a human life, or what's the value of a human life, or do we value a human life over the economy? A lot of people had to ask them, governments had to ask that question. We haven't had that conversation in a long time. What do we value as people, as a society? I live in a country that still doesn't have universal health care. Do we not value the health of our fellow citizens? It's a value consideration. I think that we need to have these value shifts in climate change as well. So my hope is with our film, like all films that touch upon climate change or the ecological crisis, either implicitly or or explicitly or implicitly, that they take it head on, or it's a part of that brew that addresses a certain subject. But I think we need to have that value shift. So my hope is that this opens people's eyes to what's happening in this really fragile part of the world, but not just to look at it where there's this sense of, oh, they're victims or there's desperation, but also see that that human dignity and equity need to be these part of the value shift. We can't address the climate change crisis without thinking about global equity. And I hope that this film sheds a light on that, because it is people on the ground in this area talking about really beautifully, really poetically about the crisis, about their hopes and dreams. You can see Maslow's hierarchy of needs at play. One of the big things that struck me again too was this idea of self-actualization. That's true for anybody. We all want to be what we want to be in our lives. And we know that climate and the ecological crisis are going to prevent people from self-actualizing. It's going to harm human security. It's going to diminish human dignity. And we believe, we should, as a society, as a global society, we need to say, hey, we believe in these fundamental human rights. We believe in these fundamental aspects of equity and dignity. And therefore, the only thing that we can do is address the crisis, because the alternative, inaction, that's going to be fundamentally unequal if we don't mitigate and address this for all. Like the COVID crisis, maybe if you have enough money, you can escape it. Maybe if you have enough money, you'll be spared. Maybe if you have enough money, you can afford to look away. But we have to have a value shift that changes that we address that inequity, that we address the crisis. So yeah, my hope is that this plays its small role in helping to make people think differently about the world we share, and then therefore take action.
Yes, hopefully. I think at least what the COVID crisis did, the pandemic crisis did, was, as we said in the beginning, as you said also, that we became much more aware of the values that we should address, and also we realized how much better it is if the air is cleaner, because the industries were down. Now we need to find a way, of course, to avoid a complete disaster economically by choosing new production possibilities. That's my belief, to choose sustainable production possibilities so we can overcome the climate crisis and overcome the economic crisis, but at the end realize that we are all in this boat together. Jared, thank you so much for taking your time. On the 24th of October, your movie is going to be in the German cinemas, am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. Weltkino is our distributor in Germany. They have big plans for it in October in theaters. So please tell all your friends, tell all your family, spread the word. And I'm thrilled to bring it to the Beyond Film Festival audience and allow the Beyond Film Festival to get the this kind of the sneak peek at the film before it comes out in theaters.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Goodbye. Likewise. To Jared Scott. Thank you.
Cheers.
Yes. Wow, he had so many intelligent things to do, so inspiring. I can't wait to see the whole movie. And as he said, we all have the possibility to see it at the Beyond Film Festival, but you need to buy a ticket for €19.90, and then you can screen over 50 films for the upcoming 2 weeks. All of the information we'll find on www.beyond-filmfestival.com. Spread the word, as Jared said. Gülsen Özkan, Ludger Pfanz, great guests. Thank you so much. I will talk to you later, because at 7:30 our next panel is coming up about Earth lungs. Jared was also talking about it all the time. It's about the trees that we can maybe hopefully make a change. And Earth Lungs has the topic of how to deal with the diminution of trees worldwide, especially, of course, in the rainforest. So there I'm looking forward to guests as well. I wish you a great break now, because we will continue with Earth Lungs, our group interview, at 7:30 p.m. Özkan, Ludger, Gülsel, sorry, the last name Özkan, Gülsel, Ludger, thank you. And we see you later. Goodbye for now.